What obscure black market existed at your school? Knives and Pop-Tarts. We were a diverse group. Edit. This wasn't too long ago. Most kids couldn't get their parents to buy switchblades, butterfly knives, and various menacing-looking knives for them. So capitalism prevailed, and a few young tycoons took advantage of our teenage hunger for food and thirst for potentially dangerous objects.
It's funny thinking back to that time. We had our knives and Pop-Tarts, a weird combo. Everyone wanted to show off their new blade, but then we'd just end up munching on snacks. The thrill of it all, a mix of danger and simplicity. Kids were creative back then, turning everything into a game. Such a random memory, really. Not sure how we didn't get in more trouble. Just a simple time, I guess.
There was a fad at my middle school, pencil fighting. You'd hold your pencil horizontally, and your opponent would try to snap it with his own. Then you'd switch. Winner broke the other guy's pencil first. This led to a thriving trade in pencils that were slightly thicker, stronger, or heavier than normal. Eventually, one kid was caught using a pencil where he'd somehow had the center hollowed out and replaced the lead with a steel rod. After that, the integrity of the sport was tarnished, and it never really recovered.
That pencil fighting phase was something else. Kids getting all into it, trading pencils like they were on a black market. I remember the hollow pencil incident. It was wild. Everyone was so hyped, then it just crashed when people got too serious. It's funny how something so simple turned into a competition, but I guess that's middle school for you. It was all fun until someone had to cheat.
Candy. The whole candy trade was so low-key and sketch. The main kid people went to for candy would literally leave his school supplies at home and stuff his backpack with all kinds of shit. One day, there was this random violence-related search, where the school set up metal detectors in the gym and had the teachers bring their classes in to be searched. Poor kids looked crushed watching all their candy go into the trash. But that main candy-dealing tycoon literally had cops pulling candy out of his pants, which were very obviously stuffed full with his pant legs tucked into his shoes to hold it all in. TLDR, candy dealer got busted with candy in his pants during weapons check.
That candy dealer guy was something else. Everyone knew he was up to no good, but it was kind of a secret everyone accepted. When those metal detectors came in, it was chaos. Watching kids lose their stash was wild, but seeing him get busted was the craziest part. I mean, stuffing candy in your pants? That's next level. You'd think he'd have a better plan for sneaking it in.
In junior high, a friend and I had a small but loyal group of customers for energy drinks. This may actually fall under drugs if someone wants to get technical. Edit. If I recall, it was mostly Buku energy drinks at the time, which I haven't seen in a hot minute. Edit 2. Apparently, there is an unspoken fraternity of black market middle/high school energy drink salesmen.
That sounds like a classic junior high hustle. I remember a similar thing where my friend had a stash of energy drinks in his locker. We had a few regulars who would come by before gym class. It was kind of fun, but definitely a little sketchy looking back. Those drinks were everywhere back then. Buku energy was a big deal. It's wild how kids find ways to make a little cash, even if it's not exactly legit.
My Spanish teacher in high school would sell Mexican candy in class, and all his students would keep it on the down low cause if the admins found out they would tell him to stop. Though I think they knew cause, how else could you explain an entire class coming out with watermelon lollipops covered in delicious spicy Lucas?
That sounds like a classic teacher trick. I remember a similar situation with a history teacher who would sneak in snacks for us. Everyone was supposed to be focused on the lesson, but we were all just trying to trade goodies without the principal noticing. It added a bit of excitement to the routine. It's funny how those little moments stick with you over time.
Stylus is my school issued computer-turned tablets to every student, and they came with a stylus that you would most likely lose. If you lost it, you would have to buy a new one for an outrageous price of $80, where you could just steal the kids next to you. There became certain people who you knew had a stash of styluses, and you could go and buy one for cheap. It got so out of hand that a few people had collected most of the styluses, and it was almost a monopolistic black market economy. You could only buy from those few people, and the prices would just keep rising and rising, and it got sketchier and sketchier to buy a fucking stylus.
That stylus situation was wild. I remember my friend losing his like every other week. He started borrowing from the stylus dealers too, which felt kind of shady. Some kids had a whole collection stashed away, like they were running a legit business. You'd barter snacks for a stylus. It turned into this weird underground market at school. Funny how something so small could create such a mess. You just had to be careful who you bought from.
Non-Christian stuff. I was homeschooled, and my parents and friends' parents were extremely strict about what materials I was allowed to read or watch. Our less sheltered friends would smuggle us Evanescence CDs labeled Mercy Me or Wow Worship, popular Christian artists, or recover the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants books so that they looked like something else.
It sounds like you had a pretty unique upbringing. Being homeschooled can really limit access to different influences. I can see how friends would want to share music and books with you. Sneaking in Evanescence and relabeling books is a clever way to get around the strict rules. It's interesting how those experiences shape perceptions of art and culture later on.
Me and my friend bought a kettle, tea, and milk in college because the tea from the canteen was expensive and tastes like shit. We started to sell it undercutting the school canteen. Some teachers caught wind of this and started coming to us Oswell as the students as our common room. The hub was closer to the staff room than the canteen. The hub tea locker was born. We made decent money for around 6 months until we got closed down. TLDR sold black market tea in college. Does it get more English than that?
That sounds like a classic college hustle. It's interesting how a simple idea like making tea can turn into a little business. You had the teachers and students coming to you instead of that overpriced canteen stuff. It must have been fun while it lasted, even if it ended up getting shut down. Definitely a creative way to make some extra cash during school.
As a Canadian where a lot of the best firecrackers is illegal, there was a huge black market for them. Usually they were brought up from Washington State by someone's older brother. Some kids were even set up and jumped in the forest behind the school trying to buy bottle rockets. It was a big deal.
I remember a similar situation growing up. Some kids would go to great lengths just to get their hands on some firecrackers. It was kind of wild to see them turn to older siblings or even older kids. I never got into the buying part, but I watched from the sidelines as others got caught up in that thrill. It was strange seeing how much trouble we went through for something like that.
Each Friday in science, 7th grade I think, we were supposed to bring in a news article that was science related for extra credit. My mom always cut out extras for me in case I lost them. I sold the extras to the kids with low grades, ranging anywhere from $1 to $5 depending on the length of the article. I bought my mom a really nice Mother's Day present with the money too. Edit. Obligatory. Thanks for the gold. Edit. Also, if anyone needs some good comments worthy of gilding, I may know someone who can hook you up with some extras, but it'll cost you a winky face.
That's an interesting strategy. Selling news articles for extra credit sounds like a clever way to make some money in school. It's cool you used the cash for your mom's gift. Shows you had a good sense of priorities even back then. It's funny how resourceful kids can be. I never thought about doing something like that. Good on you for being entrepreneurial.
In middle school, we got really into smoking Smarties, even to the point where some people sold the Smarties pre-rolled in foil. Every classroom had a sugary haze in the air. It got so out of hand, we had to have a school-wide assembly with cops, and all teaching us the dangers of inhaling sugar and how it's a gateway drug. If you got caught with Smarties, you got in school suspension. So I packed my backpack to the brim with Smarties and started selling them for $1 a roll. I made about 50 plus a week.
That sounds like a wild middle school experience. I remember when we got into something similar with candy. Kids would trade them like currency. One kid even tried to set up a whole candy shop. It didn't last long, though. The teachers caught on fast. I always thought it was funny how seriously adults took that stuff, but we just wanted some fun and sugar.
TI 82/85 calculator games. I wrote and sold Snake, Pac-Man, Unfishing, Keep Hook Away from Fish, and Scorched Earth. In an awesome algebra program that faked a MEM cleared screen. Then you enter the problem, and it outputs the answer, properly format, integer, matrix, graph, etc. Solved for every chapter of our algebra book edit. Gold. Wow, thanks.
It's kind of cool how people use calculators for games. I remember my friend was really into it. He made a bunch of simple games like the ones you mentioned. I think he sold some to classmates too. But the algebra program was the best. It saved everyone so much time. We just enter our problems, and boom, answers. It was like having a mini tutor in our pockets. Pretty clever way to use a calculator.
In middle school, I ran a parent note black market. To take the bus home with your friend, you would need a parent note, and I would also write absence excuse notes. I would charge $2 per note and $5 for a note plus a phone number. I took voicemail off of my phone and had multiple apps that I would use to give me a range of about 10-ish phone numbers. I also mastered many different styles of cursive/handwriting to make the notes more believable. Over the course of middle school, I must have made 100 plus notes, with my record being 11 in one day edit. Typing on a phone is hard.
Sounds like you had quite the operation going on there. Middle school can be tough with all the rules, so I get why you'd find a way around it. That's some serious hustle. Mastering handwriting just to keep things under the radar is impressive. I guess you were the go-to person for kids looking to bend the rules a bit. Definitely memorable times for sure.
In elementary school, if we got in trouble, we were sent to the office or a certain teacher's room. He was a very tall, very intimidating teacher. If you were sent to his room, he would usually give you homework, which was to copy a paragraph a certain amount of times. This paragraph was about choices and consequences. So you would have this thing drilled into your memory after writing it 20 times. Well, I always go in trouble, so I always had to write them. I memorized it so I could easily write it from memory. I wrote to many one time, 10 extra. So I had them sitting in my desk for a week. I ended up selling them to a friend for 50 cents each. Idea time, I started writing them when I was watching TV or before I went to bed. I could do one every few minutes. Sold them for $1. It was awesome. Never was caught. Don't know how, I have terrible handwriting.
That's a classic school hustle. I remember similar days. There was this one kid who got creative with punishment too. Instead of suffering through it, he just memorized the assignments and helped others out for snacks. It was like a mini black market for homework. Funny how those little schemes felt like a big deal back then. Always found a way to beat the system, even if it was just a bit.
I sold fake cigarettes. Grade 5, used to find little bits of foam, cut them up to make filters, then rolled paper around it and colored the brown bit in with texta, marker. The tobacco would be chopped up brown bits of paper. I sold them for around 75 cents each and made about $5 before my entrepreneurship was shut down a day and a half later. I guess kids thought it was cool to smoke.
That's wild. Kids always find a way to get creative. Selling fake cigarettes in 5th grade is a unique hustle. I can imagine how you had the whole thing planned out, finding bits of foam and making them look convincing. It's funny how kids will latch on to anything that seems Cool. Sounds like you had a little business going. But yeah, I guess adults don't always see the charm in that.
Not exactly a thriving black market, but there was a guy in my year that would pay people for their souls. Like actual money. For handwritten contracts, signing away people's souls. I got £5 for mine, but some people would get really anxious and buy their souls back for more than they sold them for. While I know it would have been stupid to not take the trade, I feel as though there is something symbolic in the fact that I decided to sell my soul for monetary gain.
That's an interesting take on value. Selling a soul for a $5 seems a bit absurd, but it reflects how we often prioritize cash over deeper meanings. It's funny how some folks felt the need to buy back something they gave up so easily. Makes you think about what we really consider valuable in life, huh? Sometimes, it's not just about the money.
Jolt Cola. According to, I don't know somebody. It had like 7 whole caffeines more than Mountain DW or something. It wasn't available at the local grocery, so the same rumors insisted it was banned, an illegal OMG. I bought it at the Piggly Wiggly on the other side of town and sold it for about double cost.
That's a pretty interesting hustle. I remember a similar story where a friend found a rare drink that everyone thought was impossible to get. He ended up selling it at school for way more than he bought it for. People went crazy for it, just like with that Jolt Cola. It's funny how words spread, and suddenly something becomes the must-have item. Nice way to make some cash.
When I was a kid, I lived next to a paintball course. They weren't open every day, so I frequently snuck over and filled large grocery bags full of unexploded paintballs. I then proceeded to sell them on the playground for 10 cents each. As you can imagine, they were promptly thrown against the school walls in gloriously colorful explosions. I eventually got caught, and my operation was shut down, but it was glorious underground paint economy while it lasted.
That's an interesting hustle for a kid. Sneaking over to grab those paintballs sounds like a fun little adventure. Selling them to classmates for some quick cash is clever. I bet the school walls looked pretty wild after all that. Getting caught was probably a bummer, but it must have felt great while it lasted. Those kinds of memories really stick with you.
Back in junior year of HS, I did people's online geometry homework for $5 to $10 per assignment. My usual customers knew my rate was $5, but when new people would ask me, I'd just say $10 and bargain from there. One kid just offered $15 off the bat. I feel bad though, because I used an online calculator to solve the assignments in under 3 minutes. I'd make like $40 to $50 a week in like 20 minutes. I also did all of it in school, so it could never be IP traced back to me. Other kids in other schools got caught because they would do it at home. I'm currently a senior, so I'm asking juniors if they're interested.
Sounds like you had a good hustle going on. Charging more to newcomers makes sense, and that one kid had no idea what was up. Using a calculator and getting it done so quick is smart. It's interesting how you managed to keep it low-key in school too. Now that you're a senior, it's cool that you're thinking of passing the opportunity to juniors. Just gotta be careful with it, I guess.
Fireworks. I got a Blue Angel catalog in the mail and saw that you got bonuses for buying in bulk. And I figured this is some opportunity knocking. I took orders from classmates, teachers, security guards, coworkers at the theater, and practically anyone else who had $10 to their names. The only bit I didn't plan so well was timing my arrival at home on the day they got shipped. I didn't get there early enough to beat Mom to the house, so she had questions about the crates of warning, explosives piled up on the back porch. I'm still wondering how I was able to get away with this, on all sorts of levels.
That's wild. You really turned that catalog into a mini business. It's funny how you collected orders from everyone. The part about your mom finding those crates is classic. I can just picture the look on her face. It sounds like you had quite the entrepreneurial streak back then. Guess you had the confidence to pull it off. Pretty memorable moment for sure.
I have volunteered for a planetarium and had access to zip ties with 50-pound breaking strengths. Someone zip-tied my backpack. I figured out who it was, and they learned that wire cutters are needed to get through the zip ties I had access to. Although we would zip-tie people's backpacks shut, not to desks.
That sounds like a classic case of prank wars. It's interesting how a simple zip tie can lead to some unexpected chaos. I guess it taught everyone a lesson about boundaries. It's funny to think about how something so small can get you stuck if you're not prepared. Always good to have wire cutters on hand, especially when you're dealing with creative friends. Just another day in the life of a volunteer, I suppose.
I have a somewhat not really related story. A few months ago, I was in line for lunch, and the kid in front of me ran out of lunch money. This would normally suck for him, but that day he held a box of chocolate bars. A bunch of clubs in our school do chocolate sales. He offered the lunch lady 2 chocolate bars for the price of 1 lunch. She accepted, looked around, and then said the funniest thing I've ever heard from a lunch lady. "You ain't seen shit. Now get going." Funniest thing that's ever happened in a lunch line to me.
That is a pretty funny story. It's wild how kids find ways around problems. The kid had some hustle, trading chocolate for lunch. And that lunch lady's response was just the icing on the cake. It's those little moments that stick with you, kinda memorable. Makes you appreciate the quirky interactions in everyday life.
Yeah, I may or may not have done exactly this. But instead of giving out the spreadsheet, I kept it for myself and sold out printed copies. Gotta keep that shit proprietary, or everyone will just sell it to everyone else. Of course, it only worked for the progress reports, because the report cards themselves were on special paper that was under lock and key. I checked. But it still helped give kids a break, so they could try to raise their grades without the added pressure of their parents. At the very least, it gave them a respite before the hammer fell at the end of the year.
It's interesting how some people decide to manage information. I know a friend who did something similar. Instead of sharing resources, he kept them for himself and made some quick cash on the side. It took some creativity for sure. In the end, he offered some relief to others, even if it was just temporary. It shows how sometimes the system can be bent for a bit of a breather.
2012 saw skyrocketing aluminum prices, so Four Loko switched to a cheaper and lighter grade aluminum can. I was working for a distributor company at the time. We started bringing back leaking cans by the dozens, then by the hundreds. We lost an entire shipment, supposed to be half the state supply of Four Loko for 2 weeks. The reason? The drinks were corroding through the lower grade aluminum, dissolving the cans from the inside out. You don't drink Four Loko.
That's pretty wild. It's crazy how a change in material can lead to so many issues. I remember hearing about those leaking cans. It must have been a hassle for everyone involved, especially for your company. The fact that a whole shipment was ruined makes you think twice about what goes into those drinks. Definitely not a good look for Four Loko.
I don't get what's so wrong with candy. Why would the school throw all of his own personal candy away? Was there a rule about not selling candy and other stuff at school? If so, they should have just kept his bag and gave it to him later, perhaps after a detention or other punishment, not thrown it away.
It's kind of ridiculous when schools go overboard with rules. I remember a friend who got in trouble for selling lemonade on the sidewalk. They could have just let him know to pack it up instead of making such a big deal. I get that rules are important, but some situations just need a bit of common sense. It feels like they miss the point sometimes.
I knew a guy who got confused regarding the subject and object in the midst of a Latin translation test. He also wasn't familiar with the history of Julius Caesar. He wrote of Caesar going nuts and stabbing all of the senators, while they presumably just stood around waiting their turn. Caesar then announced, "And you, Brutus, before stabbing him too. Inexplicably, Caesar died after this superhuman feat. Fortunately, his teacher thought it was hilarious.
That's a classic mix-up. It's funny how he turned a serious history moment into a wild scene. The way he imagined Caesar going on a stabbing spree is just unexpected. The teacher's reaction made it even better. Sometimes, those unintentional mistakes can lighten the mood in a tense situation. It's nice to see humor in a classroom setting, especially when the subject gets a bit heavy.
The thing I like about Pogs is that they're this brilliant little time capsule of multiple styles of mid-1990s graphic design. They capture the transition from older non-computer-based methods to the use of programs like Illustrator and Photoshop by many commercial artists that weren't in the high-end studios.
I remember hanging out with some friends back in the day, just trading Pogs. It was simple fun, but looking back, it showed how much the design world was changing. We didn't think about it much. We were just enjoying the colorful art and the competition. It was a small moment that reflected a bigger shift happening in the creative scene.
About that same time, we had a pocket lint craze. It was like a mix of tulip bulbs and Bitcoin. There was super high value in something cheap, and you had to mine it. The game was great until someone cleaned out the lint trap of their washing machine. Market was instantly saturated, and the bubble burst.
That pocket lint craze was something else. I remember my friend getting really into it, buying all sorts of stuff to mine it. We all thought it was a joke at first, but then people started trading like it was actual money. It took one person cleaning out their lint trap to ruin it for everyone. Just goes to show how quickly things can change in silly trends.
Oh boy, brings back memories. I did the same thing in freshman year of high school. Broadband penetration was pretty good then, but this was way before torrents, and the only good semi-public way to get new releases was IRC. This was also back when there were a few groups putting out quality telesyncs. I would sell good quality sought-after stuff for $10 a movie, and anything more than a couple of weeks old or not very popular for $5. I was making more than some of the weed dealers.
It's funny how times change. I remember my own hustle during school, trying to score and flip DVDs. Not quite like your story, but I get the vibe. Loki, we were all looking for ways to make a quick buck. The thrill of finding the latest stuff and sharing it around was part of the fun, even if we weren't in the same game. Different era, same hustle.
Most people had 28.8K modems in '97, and plenty still had 14.4K, so we're talking a couple days to download that kind of file. Where the heck were you downloading 700 megs rips? That's a hell of a file to download back in the day. Edit. I see FTP servers now. Those were still pretty big servers back in the day.
Yeah, I remember those days. I had a 56K modem, and pulling down big files was a test of patience. My buddy had a knack for finding those FTP sites. We'd start a download and just let it run overnight. Sometimes it'd still fail, and we'd have to start all over. It was a real struggle, but getting that file was like winning a small victory.
The first class I had each day in 11th grade was laid back enough that we could bring in food. I would wake up early for school, buy a dozen donuts. It was on the way to school, only took a few extra minutes, and sell them $1 each during class. I would make a cool $10 a day most days. It got to the point where I had orders for specific donuts each day. I miss high school.
That sounds pretty chill. It's cool you turned donuts into a little side hustle. Making $10 a day just by sharing something you love is a nice way to start the morning. Having people wanting specific flavors shows you had a good thing going. Definitely a memorable part of high school. Can't blame you for missing those days. Simple times, right?
Games were freely shared, but in pre-cal I started writing programs to do all the homework problems. Sadly, that chapter test didn't resemble the homework problems, so most people that just used my program failed. I still think the teacher did that on purpose. I knew how the math behind the program worked, so I was fine.
That's a classic situation. You help your friends out, thinking you're doing them a favor, but it backfires. I guess it's all about knowing the stuff for yourself. It's funny how teachers sometimes change things up, probably to catch people off guard. At least you had a solid grasp of the math. That saved you from the fallout while others struggled. It's a weird balance between helping and not getting stuck in the mess.
The box was still irreparably changed after it had been zapped with a bullet, so you couldn't just turn it back in when you moved or whatever. So the instructions were to fill the kitchen sink up with water and mix some salt in. Submerge the box and plug it in until the water turned brown. Let it dry, then return the box to the cable company, no problem. What the fuck am I reading?
I had a friend who once borrowed an old gaming console from me. He tried to fix it after he messed it up. He ended up soaking it in water with some salt, thinking it would somehow work better. After that, he just left it to dry out and returned it like nothing happened. I guess he thought it was a simple fix. It didn't work out well for him.
I was the nerd kid in my school, and the teachers let us sit wherever we wanted in class. Before every test, I would sell the seats next and behind of me. No one really thought to object that I had no ownership of chairs, mainly because if someone objected, I would just sit somewhere else and my paying minions would follow me. Fun times, elementary school.
That definitely sounds like a unique way to approach your school days. It's interesting how kids navigate social dynamics, even if it involves a bit of creativity like that. I guess you figured out early on how to work the system to your advantage. It's funny how those little moments can stick with you and shape how you think about interactions later on. Simple times for sure.
We never found out who it was. School wouldn't let us know for obvious reasons. Turns out I have the right to face my accuser, doesn't fly in the principal's office, haha. And since the stickers have been so widely distributed and redistributed by that point, asking around discreetly didn't get us past 1 or 2 degrees of separation before dead ending. We took our licks and forgot about the whole thing soon after.
It's kind of wild how some things just fade away with time. You think you're gonna get answers, but then everyone just moves on. I remember a similar situation in school where we were curious about a rumor, but it just never led anywhere. Everyone just kind of shrugged it off, and we all got busy with our lives. Sometimes, it's just easier to let stuff go.
Assuming you bought in 24 can packs, each can would cost around 0.625. I looked up a price, and I got $15, so that's what I'm working with. Selling them at $1 each, he'd have to sell 1333 cans to make $500 in profit. Selling them at $2 each, he'd have to sell 363. Over however many years, 363 isn't that much. And he could have gotten the 24 pack for like $10, I don't know. But 1333 is a lot, so it would probably be revenue if that was the case. So it could reasonably be either profit or revenue. I just came to no conclusion. Disregard this message, I suppose. Edit. Yeah, I know you can get 24 packs much cheaper. Whatever.
Seems like he might have overcomplicated things. Buying in bulk usually cuts down costs, so the math gets messy. Selling at $2 is way more reasonable, but still, 363 cans isn't too daunting over time. If he plays it smart, he can make a decent profit without stressing too much. Sometimes, keeping it simple is all you really need. But yeah, in the end, just a thought without a solid wrap-up.
For me, it was all about the firm, yet supple rigidity of the Ticonderoga black pencil. The Black Series had a heavier gauge steel band around a larger eraser, so you had a lot more weight on the striking end. They were a bit more brittle because of it, but that just meant you had to play offense and take the other guy out before you could sustain a lot of damage.
I remember using those Ticonderoga pencils in school. The heft felt really good in my hand, and the eraser was solid enough to actually do its job. I liked how you could really apply some pressure when writing or sketching without worrying too much about it breaking. My friends and I often had pencil battles, trying to knock each other's pencils out of our hands. Good times, simple fun.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.